Thank you. I agree with you completely, Professor. It is a monetary issue, and it is uh, something where they're hoping to garner votes. It is very scary, and in some ways, I agree with you as well that the province, in some ways, Canada is looking and watching what's happening here, and 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 that's why it's so important that we all come together, I think, as well, because it really isn't it so upsets me every time the counselors get together every Wednesday morning, and anytime anything like this sort of conversation comes up, it's immediately labeled as racist, and the person is called as Islamophobic, and that's upsetting, especially for someone who comes from a culture that, you know, we have friends in both of us in both cultures, and it's upsetting to be, for me personally, to be seen by my friends, my Muslim friends, as a racist, when, you know, I hope I don't think I am, and hopefully I don't want them to think I am. That way is extremely upsetting to me, and it's almost, people don't want to say anything, and that's the thing that's becoming so dangerous now, that people are on, non-Muslims are afraid to say anything now because they also don't want to be labeled. So it's like being in the middle, you know, between a rock and a hard place now, because if you're not part of the fundamentalists, you're scared to say anything. If you're not Muslim, you're afraid to say anything because you don't want to be labeled as racist. And I do wonder sometimes what's left. How do you do this? And then and Ram knows this as well. In all my talks with people, in all my anything I've written, I've always said we need to be very clear, we need to be very practical, we need to have, you know, a great deal of common sense, and we have to be very focused in whatever we say, because it's an uphill battle. It really is.
Thank you, Sonia. So our next question is from John Bibawi. I'm going to unmute John in just a moment. John has a question for you. John, can you please unmute? Come forward, John Bibawi. John?
Yeah. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, clearly.
Hi, Dr. Salim. A quick question for you. Can you tell us more about the Azan? What's the content of it? How is the content relevant to the Muslim community in Mississauga and the other cities? Is it in any way offensive to other certain sects, to other non-Muslims, and how should they interpret it?
Well, again, you know, let me answer this through a metaphor and a simile, an example. The knife with which we put butter on our bread and cut our meat and onion has a useful purpose, but the same knife can be used to injure another person or take another person's life, you see. So the guilty party is not the knife, it is the person, how it is used. The call to prayer has nothing offensive in it, you know, and the person who's offended by it possibly has his or her own reason behind it, you know. So we are entering the psychological domain, the social cultural domain, or why that person or the other community should be offended. So that opens up a whole different host of discussion. However, the way and the manner in which this call to prayer issue has arisen in this time, in this context, is a cause of genuine concern for all of us, Muslim and non-Muslim. As I said a little while ago, uh, it has never happened that a public call to prayer has been made in Canada or in my city where I've been living for 35 years. And before that, I lived in other parts of Ontario. I lived for a little while in Mississauga. I lived in downtown Toronto when I was a student at University of Toronto. I've lived in Ottawa when I worked in Ottawa. So I've never encountered this, and I'm speaking here as a Muslim, who maintain my tradition. The month of fasting has just ended. I was fasting with my family. And so this call to prayer, the manner in which it has arisen, is a cause of concern for those people who feel offended, as I said, and that I would have to then enter into the social, cultural, and psychological domain of why that offenses, that those people might feel offended. But in itself and by itself, there is no reason. The call to prayer is simply calling people of a particular faith tradition to prayer. And it is done in around the world in Muslim majority countries. I'm not talking about Canada or Britain or France or United States, from Morocco to Indonesia. And there's almost 2 billion people in the world who are Muslim. And the call to prayer is done in a Muslim majority country, and it is part of the tradition. So, that is their tradition, and that is fine. The question becomes, why here, why now, and why do others have to be, in that sense, be exposed to something which is not their tradition? So that, as I said, the most important obligation each one of us have is that in our behavior, in our conduct, we are respectful of the other. We cannot demand respect from the other unless we respect the other. And there has been 2 groups of people who have broken that fundamental basis in which a society, a good society, functions. They have broken the principle of respect and fairness. The city councillors have broken that, who happen to be, I believe, I don't know if there are city councillors in Mississauga who are of Muslim background. In London, there are city councillors of Muslim background. At least I know a couple of them of Muslim background, or one of them at least, definitely. But the majority of them, the overwhelming majority, are non-Muslim. They are of European background. Why did they concede to this request? So they broke that fundamental thread of fairness and respect. And then the Muslim authorities of the mosque who made this demand that has no basis on doctrinal ground, that if you don't call to prayer in a loudspeaker, there was no loudspeaker in the time of the Prophet. That too, the loudspeaker itself is an invention of non-Muslims that has nothing to do with Muslims. So you can see that this is politics at play, and it is not religion at play.
Sir, our next caller is Nigel. Nigel, I've asked you to unmute. You can come up and ask Professor Mansur your question yourself.
Yeah. Hi, Ram. Hi, Professor Mansur. Thanks for taking my question. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay. My question is this happened possibly through some financial coercion, as mentioned by Professor Mansur, to specific municipal authorities to start this as a snowball to where all the other municipalities would follow suit. Is there any evidence of this in your view? And in my second part of the question, is there any way we can prevent this from happening in the future for this decision to keep going on if requested in such manner?
The first answer is very simple. It is already snowballed. It is not simply limited to Mississauga. It is now across the country. The second part of the question is, Well, as far as I understand, Mr. Ram Subramaniam and his friends and group that is now have a membership of over 10,000 people and is raising funds, is to take this matter to the courts, because there has been an infringement of rights. There has been a wrong done. And why do an individual or an organization or a group of people, a community, why do they go to the courts? They go to the courts to remedy the wrong. Now, whether the court is going to remedy the wrong is another set of questions. But going to the court is seeking fairness and justice, seeking the remedy for what you believe, and I fully concur with that, a wrong has been done.
Our next question is from a lady by name Meena, and she has a very interesting question, which is not directly related to, it's quite interesting nonetheless. Meena, you're up next.
Yeah, I live in Milton, and my son stood as a school board in the school board, and at that time we learned that they are having food, halal food in schools, and they have a choice. And they had prayer room, and they do prayers there in the Muslim kids. They do the prayers. While our own kids, they sit in a room and just wait for them to come back. So how does that work? Because we have 2 counselors who are Muslims, and it goes on. And the rest are non-Muslims.
So,
Professor Mansur.
So your question is about in the public school system, what is happening. And I believe Ms. Subramaniam is part of an organization engaged in trying to figure out through the mechanism of city bylaws and public school rules and bylaws, or whether this is permissible or not. You know, my own opinion is that Muslim kids in a school, if their parents want them to eat halal or kosher food, just as Jewish kids, will provide for that. And there is no, in that sense, obstacle or impediment from the school authority for the parents to provide their children with the food that belongs to their tradition, you know. But I don't know whether children getting together in school for prayer, in this case, Muslim prayer, other children who are non-Muslim have to participate in that, and that there is a requirement. I'm not aware of that, you know. I think this is totally voluntary. But the fact of the matter is that if the school is providing space for such prayer or such events surrounding a particular faith tradition, does that impinge upon, does that infringe the rights and protect others who are, in this case, do not belong to that tradition, that is non-Muslim? And if that is not provided for, then there, I think, is a question to be raised with the authorities.